Depression affects millions of people worldwide, and despite advances in mental health treatments, many patients continue to struggle with the debilitating symptoms of this condition. Traditional antidepressant medications are often the first line of treatment, but they are not always effective and they can have significant side effects. In recent years, a growing body of research has suggested that psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, may offer a promising alternative to traditional antidepressants. Psilocybin works differently from conventional antidepressants and appears to have a more holistic effect on the brain, possibly leading to longer-lasting benefits for patients. In this documentary, we will explore the potential of psilocybin therapy as a treatment for depression and examine the latest research on the fascinating area of study. We will hear from researchers, clinicians, and someone with experience using the drug, and explore the science behind this treatment, including how psilocybin affects the brain and what makes it different from traditional antidepressants. Through personal stories and expert analysis, we will investigate the chances of psilocybin becoming a mainstream treatment for depression and examine the challenges and opportunities presented by this emerging field. Join me as I delve into the world of psilocybin therapy and explore its potential to transform the way we approach mental health. The first recorded use of psilocybin containing mushrooms by Westerners dates back to the early 16th century when Spanish explorers encountered indigenous people in what is now Mexico using these mushrooms in religious ceremonies. However, it wasn't until the mid-20th century that psilocybin was isolated and identified as the active compound in these mushrooms. In the 1950s and 60s, psilocybin and other psychedelic drugs gained popularity among scientists, psychiatrists, and countercultural groups. Researchers began to study the effect of these drugs on the brain and patients' behavior.
So many of the changes produced by this drug have to be described verbally. And here we have the advantage of an artist who is able to draw a sketch, and you can see all the changes just by simply observing the various distortions that will take place in your own portrait.
Some psychiatrists even use them in therapy sessions to treat various mental health conditions. However, the use of psilocybin and other psychedelics were banned in the United States and many other countries in the 1970s, following concerns about their potential for abuse and harm. This effectively halted most research on these drugs for several decades. In recent years, however, there has been a renewed interest in psilocybin as a potential treatment for various mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Studies have shown promising results leading to reclassification of psilocybin as a Schedule IV drug in the United States, which means that it has some medical value and a low potential for abuse. Today, psilocybin therapy is being studied and used in clinical settings in several countries around the world, and there is a growing interest in its potential to revolutionize the field of mental health treatment.
In relation to effectively treating depression, resetting the psychological dial, if you will, but also signpost the need for pragmatic, or as we call it, real-world evidence studies to build on their findings, and then examine how psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy works on a day-to-day treatment setting.
Psilocybin is a psychedelic compound that is found in certain species of mushrooms. When ingested, psilocybin is metabolized into psilocin, which acts as the serotonin receptors in the brain. Psilocin activates the 5-HT2A receptor, which is thought to be involved in a variety of psychological processes, including mood, perception, and cognition. In the context of psilocybin therapy, the drug is typically administered in a controlled setting, with the patient lying down and wearing eye shades and headphones to minimize the external stimuli. The therapist is present to provide support and guidance throughout the experience. During the session, patients may experience a range of effects, including altered perception, changes in mood, and a sense of spiritual or mystical experience. These effects are thought to be related to changes in the brain's connectivity, particularly in regions that are involved in self-reflection and emotion regulation. Studies have found that psilocybin therapy may have a longer-lasting effect on depression symptoms than traditional antidepressants. For example, one study found that patients who received psilocybin therapy had reduced depression and anxiety symptoms for up to 6 months after treatment.
So we've recently completed a study in 51 cancer patients with life-threatening cancer diagnosis who met clinical criteria for having a depression or anxiety disorder. These volunteers were randomly assigned to receive either a low dose or a high dose of psilocybin under double-blind conditions. Now, these results are still preliminary, but they're very promising. And what this graphic shows is the percentage of volunteers showing clinically significant improvement in depressed mood. The orange bar shows that 92% of those people who received the high dose of psilocybin 5 weeks after the session were reporting or were showing clinically significant improvements, much greater than the green bar that shows the effects after the low dose of psilocybin. The blue bar shows that the effects of this high dose of psilocybin are sustained out to 6 months. So about 80% are continuing to show clinically significant improvement. And in fact, in 70% of these, the symptoms have remitted to the normal range. We're showing similar effects for anxiety.
Psilocybin is different from traditional antidepressants in several key ways. Traditional antidepressants work by increasing the level of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, while psilocybin works by binding to serotonin receptors and modulating the activity of certain brain regions. The effect of psilocybin therapy can be felt after just 1 or 2 sessions, while traditional antidepressants can take several weeks to start working. The effects of psilocybin therapy can last for weeks or even months after just 1 or 2 sessions, while traditional antidepressants typically need to be taken daily for an extended period of time. Psilocybin therapy includes a psychedelic experience, which can be intense and potentially challenging for some patients, while traditional antidepressants do not have these psychoactive effects. Psilocybin therapy is thought to have a more holistic effect on the brain, affecting multiple regions and networks that are involved in mood and cognition, while traditional antidepressants tend to have more of a targeted effect on the specific neurotransmitter systems. I spoke to Peter about his experience taking psilocybin and other psychedelics in his younger years, and asked if he could see it being a more effective treatment than antidepressants. Do you remember what the effect you felt after eating magic mushrooms?
Well, generally, a euphoric sort of feeling, happy and giggly and lively. Side effects, yawning. I don't know why, but they seem to make you yawn a lot. But aside from that, I can never recall ever having felt bad from taking mushrooms in the way that I did with taking LSD on occasions. I'd never say I had a bad trip from mushrooms. But I can see how this idea of using psilocybin as some sort of an antidepressant could, I know they used to use LSD in the early days, before it became illegal, I think in the 1950s and early 1960s, amongst various other ways they experimented with it, using it as like a chemical weapon and so on and so forth. But I think they did used to use it as either a cure for alcoholism or to treat people with depression. And I could see how, with kind of bad trips and so forth, that'd be a really bad idea. But I could see how kind of smaller controlled doses of psilocybin might possibly work. Because certainly, as I say, I always felt kind of happy and giggly on mushrooms. Personally, I've not used any illegal drugs for many, many years. Given the fact that many of the legal drugs that are used to treat depression have awful side effects and addictive properties, psilocybin isn't addictive. It's not going to be taking people down the same kind of route as if they're prescribed diazepam, for example. Psilocybin being something natural, in the same way as CBD is being used for various things these days. I'd say it definitely is worth the powers that be looking at it.
In conclusion, psilocybin is a fascinating and promising area of research when it comes to treatment of depression. While it's still a relatively new area of study, the results are far more encouraging, with many patients reporting significant improvements in their symptoms after receiving psilocybin therapy. As we've seen in this documentary, psilocybin works differently from traditional antidepressants and may offer a more holistic approach to treating depression by increasing connectivity between different areas of the brain. However, it's important to emphasize that psilocybin is not a silver bullet, and its use should always be guided by a trained healthcare professional in a safe and controlling setting. There are still many questions to be answered about psilocybin's potential risks and benefits, and more research is needed to fully understand its effects. Nonetheless, the growing body of research into psilocybin's potential therapeutic benefits is exciting and suggests that it may be more of a vulnerable tool in the treatment of depression and other mental health conditions. As we look to the future, it will be interesting to see how psilocybin research develops and how it can be integrated into our current approach to mental health care.